Hello, this is Joshua Spodek, and I'm here to talk about leadership and the environment. I'm recording this for my podcast, so I don't have an actual audience, so it won't be quite as dynamic. Also, I'm not going to stop for the questions, so feel free to pause, but I'm just going to go right through them. I think it speaks for itself, so I'll just get started. And I'd like to start with a few questions for you, the audience. What brought you here? How does leadership relate to the environment? What are you looking for in this presentation? Can we agree on a few points? Now, I'm not saying that you have to agree with me, but I've looked at the science, I've done a lot of research, and I've come to certain conclusions, and I think a lot of other people have. Now, I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but this is for people who have looked at the science, looked at the situation, and come to conclusions similar to what I have, and are wondering what to do about it. That there is a greenhouse effect, that there's pollution, that we are overusing natural resources, and likely results including flooding, global sea level rises. Also, that the science behind these things is conclusive. I'm happy for more science to happen, but in my opinion, that the science is pretty conclusive so far. Also, that these things are human caused, that we are contributing to carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and other pollution, and that if we want to change these things, then that means we have to change our behavior. Our behavior is causing these things. If that's the case, then we would have to change our behavior to reduce these things. Now, I do want to note, I could be wrong about the science. I'm trained in science, and I've looked at the data, and it looks one way. But new data could come out that might suggest things are a different way. I'm totally open to that happening. As it's happened so far, I keep hoping and I keep searching every time I find out that maybe there's an error in the science, or maybe there's a new technology that might fix a situation that people thought was unfixable, or people are moving in some direction that we didn't think of. But every time I chase something down, every time I research this stuff, it always comes to the same conclusion, that it's human caused, these problems are serious, and that they're now. A lot of people that think about climate change right now, they think about the environment right now, and they think climate change is a big thing. It is a big thing. Here I point out South Florida's mayors face reality of rising seas and climate change. Many of them are Republican, and a lot of people associate Republicans with not agreeing with this, but they see it happening in their backyards. It's also pollution. More plastic than fish in the sea by 2050. This one I have to pause for because this is really shocking. We've seen the size of the ocean, and I don't know if this says more about how much plastic we've put into the sea or how many fish we've taken out, but this is just, to me, incredible. Resource depletion of topsoil and many other resources, extinctions, especially of land mammals that compete with space and with food with us, also the Great Barrier Reef and things in the ocean, aquifers being drained, the food supply running out and poisoned, and lots of other things. This is the tip of the iceberg. Here's another example. If you look here in red, are these remote islands called the Pitcairn Islands, far from any continent, very far from where any large civilization is. And a couple of them are unpopulated. And here in particular is this beach with, quote, the highest density of plastic rubbish anywhere in the world. Possibly some of this stuff was once ours. It's a lot of plastic little knickknacks like lighters and things like that. Okay, let's talk about me and about you. So first, who am I? If you look at my CV credentials, you'll see that I have a PhD in physics. There I am at Columbia University getting it. My PhD is in astrophysics. I helped build a satellite that observes the outside universe, so supernova remnants and active galactic nuclei and things like that. I left school to become an entrepreneur. Here's the Wall Street Journal's first article about me and the company that I co-founded in the late 90s. The business went well for a while. I got squeezed out by the investors. That's a painful experience for me that I won't go into here, but I went back. Here's a picture of me getting my MBA. Well, it's the same picture of me getting my PhD because that's the good picture. Business school is where I first learned that there were classes in leadership, that you didn't have to be born with this, but you could learn it. And in the dozen years or so since, I have made learning leadership and the practice of teaching leadership, active, experientially, project-based, that has been a big passion of mine. So I've become an educator. I'm an adjunct professor at NYU. I work with the Columbia Program in Social Intelligence on coaching MBA students and things like that there. I've done some lectures and things like that. I also, independently of any school, offer my courses through Spodek Academy. So I urge, if you're interested in learning leadership, entrepreneurship, sales, things like that, to go there. I'm a blogger and podcaster. I recommend reading joshuaspodek.com. I post to it every single day. I'm a columnist for Inc., so I write there as well. And as of a few months ago, I'm an author, and in particular, best-selling author. So there's my book, Leadership Step by Step, Become the Person Others Follow. And I can't help but note that I have, as of last I checked, 58 reviews, of which 56 are 5-star. Please go check them out. and read those reviews because this book makes a big difference to a lot of people. But this isn't about my book, although this is about leadership. I am not here to tell you facts or science. If you have not learned the science or you have not acted on the science, it is not because the science is not out there. There's plenty of science, there's plenty of reports, there's plenty of information. If you go online, it's all there. If it's gone one ear in one ear and out the other, telling you more will be just more noise. And I'm not here to give you more noise. I don't want to be ineffective. Nor am I going to tell you what to do, nor am I going to give you advice, nor am I going to give you tips or give you guilt or blame. I have not found that to be effective, and I have no intent of being ineffective and just talking something that people are missing. You have your values. I'm here as a leader to support you in doing what you feel is right. If you're here, you believe that the science is conclusive and that it's time to do something about these things and not what's been done before. Either you're perfect or you're not. If you're perfect, please contact me and let me know how you've become that way, because I would very much like to learn from you. If you're not perfect, you probably want to improve in some ways. And if so, you probably have role models, people that you would like to emulate. Now, I'm not saying you want to be just like them, but there are probably people who have properties and behaviors and things. Could be historical, could be people today, could be family, could be people you've never met. If that's the case, then they probably became that way. They probably developed the things that they would like to be. And I ask you to think about these people, at least one of them, and think to yourself, how did they get that way? Now, it's possible they were simply born that way, or it's also possible, I think more likely, that they had to do something to become that way. And in the big spectrum, where at one end of the spectrum, they just sat on the couch watching TV, eating ice cream and cookies or something like that, maybe they just, through comfort and convenience, became that way. Or when I do this in person, I ask for a show of hands, did their heroes become that way by taking on challenges and persevering? So show of hands, was it more comfort and convenience, more challenge and perseverance? Now, in every case, it's always people got that way through challenge and perseverance. If you haven't become the way that you would like to become, why is that? And a lot of people tell me, they say things in different words, but they say, maybe if their hero was Nelson Mandela, they say, if I were born under apartheid, I would have a big challenge to take on. I would fight against apartheid. And maybe even if I didn't become full Nelson Mandela, I at least would have become a lieutenant. I would have helped in this, and I would have used this challenge. This challenge would have led me to reach my potential. Now, I happen to be born in a country without apartheid, in a family that was well-to-do, it was a middle-class family, and I didn't have these challenges. And you can't blame me for not reaching my potential because I didn't have this big challenge. Okay, well, you are in luck. If you felt I didn't have a challenge to push me to my limits, you live in a time where there is a challenge that our species face that has never faced before. This is a challenge that you can take to whatever level you want. If you want to become like a Mandela or Martin Luther King, we need to motivate billions of people to change their behavior. No one has ever done that before. This challenge has everything you need to reach your potential. If you just want to be a helper and don't want to go to that level, you can help and not push yourself to that limit. Whatever level of challenge you want, it's there for you. You can reach your potential. Not a potential that I'm telling you about, but a potential that you told me that you were capable of, that you wanted to reach, that's by your values. This is your chance to reach your potential. How? First, by knowing your values, to know that this is something that matters to you. Probably you feel like you want to leave this world a better place than you found it. I personally feel like I came into a polluted world. I wish it wasn't as polluted. I do not want to leave it as polluted for other people. Once you know your values, is to act on them. Now, if you've behaved one way and you want to behave a different way, it is going to look to you like deprivation and sacrifice. You're going to feel, and you are going to not be able to do things that you used to do. You're going to have to start doing things that you didn't want to do. It will look like that, and you will have to go through a transition. It will feel challenging. You'll be doing things that you never did before and not doing things you always wanted to do. But on the other side of that transition, living by your values means that you will be glad that you made that change. After the transition will be hard, but you will look back and you'll wish that you had changed earlier. Why? Because you will live a better life by your standards. Again, not by anybody else's standards, but by yours. That's what happens when you live by your values. Some of you will take on leadership roles in a movement, this movement, with global demand. That means that you will be able to act on as local a level as you want, but as big as you want, including leading billions of people to change their behavior, to follow in your footsteps, to live by their values through a transition, but to a life that is better for themselves. The problem, as I see it, the big problem is that people want to pollute less, but they can't help themselves. We live in a system, we live in many systems that have promoted behaving a certain way, the way that created this pollution, the way that created these greenhouse gases in our environment. One of the many roles of a leader is to help people do what they've always wanted to do, but couldn't. I think of Martin Luther King as the big example here. Martin Luther King did not get people to do what he wanted them to do. He got them to do what they wanted to do. He just showed them how. That's not to say that they wanted to go to jail, to sit at lunch counters, and many were beaten, many were put in jail, many were sprayed by fire hoses or attacked by police dogs. It's not to say that they wanted that. They wanted freedom, justice, and equality, but they didn't know how to achieve that. He showed them that by doing these intermediate steps, they could achieve that. Now, we're far from perfect racial equality, but we've come a long way. So why don't they do this? Now, look inside yourself. If you have not done these things, you have some of the answers. But by and large, people make two calculations that I see. People my age and older often they'll think to themselves, okay, there's a situation that's going to happen. Maybe in 2050, there'll be something that I really don't want to have happen. People my age and older, they'll say something like, let's see, 2050, I was born in 1971, so 2050, I'll be 79 years old. Whew, that was close. That seems like a pretty bad situation for somebody else, but I'm going to die before it's a really big deal. So someone else has to deal with that. And most of the people who are in positions of authority can make changes relatively easily. From the president to Congress to the judges to the CEOs of most major organizations, they're my age and older. So they don't quite have the incentive to make these changes. And if they do, it's very difficult. So it's easier for them not to. The other big calculation is it's a hot summer day. You'd like to turn on the air conditioning. It would make you more comfortable. By the way, it could also be something like you're hungry, you want a steak, maybe you really like eating meat. If you like steak, it's the same sort of decision. But say it's a hot day. If you turn on the air conditioner and you live in a place where your power comes from coal, you might think to yourself, if I turn this on, it will cause pollution. It'll cause greenhouse gases to be emitted, mercury to be emitted. I don't like that, so maybe I should not turn it on. Well, if I don't turn it on, I'll be uncomfortable. But if all the other people, if they don't also do this, then the problem's still going to happen. And my difference is so small compared to everybody else's, it doesn't really make a difference. I might as well turn it on. So these problems are what I call not my problem or tragedy of the commons. They're not my problem. I also say everybody cares about the environment until they want to see the Eiffel Tower. And then suddenly, oh, the plane was going to fly anyway. Or one day there'll be solar planes. Now, the plane was going to fly anyway. That's not how supply and demand works. If you pay for a ticket, you pay for that oil to be used, or that jet fuel. And the tragedy of the commons is, I'll explain it very briefly. The tragedy of the commons is a name given to a well-known established effect in economics that, say there's a community, this was first talked about in England, so a community where there's a field where if you put 50 sheep in the field, the grass grows at a rate where the grass will grow at the rate that the sheep eat it, so 50 sheep can graze there, no problem. And imagine there's 50 farmers, each with one sheep. If you look at the perspective from any one farmer's perspective, you could put on an extra sheep. If nobody noticed, then you get double the benefits of selling the wool and things like that, but you only get 1/50th the loss. What's the loss? Well, with 51 sheep, they're eating it faster than the grass regrows, so after some time, it will turn into a dust bowl. Okay, you get double the benefit, but only 1/50th the loss, you're going to do it. But what actually happens, or what can happen, all 50 farmers might put a double the sheep, and suddenly it's overgrazed very quickly. Everybody loses. So everybody has incentive to put an extra sheep in, even though everybody loses in the long term. That's what happens with the oceans. People dump into the oceans or they overfish. It's what happens with the environment, with the atmosphere. People pollute extra. Everybody benefits in not having to pay for the cleanup, but in the long term, everybody loses as well. We have not been able to solve the tragedy of the commons for oceans and the sky. We've solved it in some cases. For example, here in New York City, we have Central Park. Decades ago, it was a big dust bowl, and we were able to fix it by regulating, and we could regulate it and we could enforce it because it's all contained within one city. We have a police force that can regulate it. Likewise, There are other places where we privatize things, and when you privatize different, you can chop up a commons and give everybody a piece, and everybody has an incentive to keep theirs clean, to not overgraze their land. And other times when you have a small enough community where everybody knows each other, you can also self-regulate. But none of these work when you talk about a global scale, because the Pacific, there are many communities interact with the Pacific or the environment or the atmosphere. Everybody can put smoke and things into the atmosphere, and you can't really stop it, but we all have to share it. So there's been no solution to this. Easter Island is a case where for a long time people lived, before the Europeans arrived, there was a thriving civilization, but they overused the natural resources. In particular, somebody chopped down the last tree on Easter Island. As I understand it, there was a thriving civilization that by the time the Europeans arrived, its population dropped by 90%. Is it possible that something like that could happen on a global level, that we could see the populations drop by that much? I'm not sure, but it's conceivable. For a long time, people saw what was happening. Actually, for a long time, people knew about the greenhouse effect and thought this is not possible to happen on a global scale, something we don't have to worry about. Then over the past few decades, we thought maybe it's possible, but also we thought maybe the science was wrong. Maybe we would come up with a technology to capture the carbon dioxide and sequester it in a way that it could be sequestered for a long enough period of time. We thought the market might lead prices on non-renewables to go up and renewables to go down. We thought growth would take care of things, but it is just not happening. None of these wait and see strategies are working. It is time to change people's behavior and beliefs, what I call leadership. None of these things are working. How can I tell they're not working? Because the greenhouse gas levels are increasing, the sea level rising is increasing and accelerating. So if it requires leadership, let's talk about leadership. My first question to you is about leadership and the environment. Can you name effective leadership in the environment where leadership means influencing others to act for a common goal? I'm not asking about people who are raising awareness, because the greenhouse effect and pollution, they don't act on what you are aware of, they act on what you do. So can you name leaders who are influencing people's behavior to follow them for their goal? Now, I've asked a lot of people, I'm not doing this scientifically, but generally the most common answers are, I don't know. Most people cannot think of they cannot name a single leader leading in the area of the environment. Next most common is Al Gore, who did Inconvenient Truth. Next after that is Leonardo DiCaprio. His movie came out last year, Before the Flood. Now, in both of these cases, I push back a bit on people and ask them, have you actually changed your behavior? Or do you know people who have changed their behavior because of these movies or because of these people? Generally, they say, no, it's just I'm more aware, which doesn't change things. I've been thinking lately about taking a leadership role in this area, and really, I don't want to take a leadership role in this area if I don't have to, because whoever takes a leadership role in this area is going to become a lightning rod. It's like walking through a minefield. But I really thought a lot about who is leading this area, and at one point it hit me, I thought of some, and I'm going to name a couple people for you, and your answer is going to be like this. You're going to go, oh, what? Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. And so when I talk about people who influence people to follow their lead, the Koch brothers and Donald Trump, in terms of influencing others to follow their lead, these three people are by far the biggest leaders in influencing people and leading others in the area of the environment. Now, you're probably thinking leading in the other direction of decreasing global gas emissions and decreasing pollution, and they tend to be increasing it, but they're influencing people's behavior. So if I look at the people who are trying to lead in the direction of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions and decreasing pollution and protecting resources, the current ways I see people trying to lead others are guilt, blame, doom, and gloom, education, information, and convincing people through logical argument, giving people tips and advice, and legislation without popular support. And I want to reiterate that these methods, everything that has been done so far, is not working. How do I know it's not working? Because the greenhouse gas levels are increasing and so forth. That's not to say that nothing's happening. There's a lot of progress, and I'm happy that this progress is happening, but it is negligible compared to the potential that we could do in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of reducing pollution, in terms of protecting our environment more. And I want to go through each of these and explain through a few slides why each of these does not work. Now, first, the guilt, blame, doom, and gloom. I don't think I have to go into why these don't work. I think In my experience, we've all been in relationships where we've tried to guilt others, we've tried to blame others, and it doesn't help. And we've been guilted and blamed, and it generally doesn't help. So I'm not going to go into detail on that one. So let's look at education. Facts don't change behavior, especially when it's going up against pleasure or comfort and convenience. My big example here is we in the United States know more about nutrition and also in diseases of excess like heart disease and diabetes of almost any time in history. But it doesn't change our behavior when the behavior is against things like eating Ben and Jerry's. This map here shows obesity trends in the United States from the mid-'80s until 2000, I think it was 2010. And you'll see down here below that we have to keep adding numbers of the obesity levels. Here it went from 15%, now it has to be at least 20%. Soon it's going to get up to 25%. Then it's going to get up to 30%. And then this map here shows in 2015, we have to go all the way up to over 35%. We have to keep increasing the numbers. This is not changes in genetics. Here is my mentor, #1 leadership author and guru, Marshall Goldsmith. He puts it very succinctly. In life, our problem isn't understanding, it's doing. I think most people understand what we want to do. We just don't do it. He's made a lifelong career of helping people change their behavior because it's very difficult to, and generally people don't without people being led to do it. I'm sure we've all watched nature shows. In my experience, nature shows, they show beautiful scenes of the world. Here, for example, is Leonardo DiCaprio's movie. Here he is, I believe this is in Greenland. He flew to there, and then from where he flew, he took a helicopter, and there's a beautiful scene. And I think a lot of people say, we'd like to protect that. It's beautiful there. Here is a helicopter shot of the polar bears. We know that with the ice melting, they have to swim farther and farther. Here he is in India, where he sees the environmental degradation there from the population growth. Here's a helicopter shot of the Great Barrier Reef. Here he is with the celebrity Elon Musk. Here is a helicopter shot of, I think, a Costa Rican rainforest in any case. And I think it's fair for the average person who doesn't really know much about the science, if they watch these nature shows, to say to themselves, yes, I believe what you guys are experts. I believe what's going on. I would like to change things. I wonder what I should do to change things. Well, you guys know better than I do. I should probably do what you're doing. Well, what are you doing? You're flying all around the world, taking helicopters around to see the beautiful things. I guess I should also fly around the world and take helicopter shots of beautiful things. And if you look at Leonardo DiCaprio in his movie, he doesn't really change his behavior. He's doing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think it's fair for people to follow in their footsteps, and it's not effective. It leads people to fly all around the world and do these things. Talking about tips and advice. Here are some examples, tips and advice from people who don't really know. I guess these journalists don't really know. But here's the New York Times did a story not long ago, how to have a green vacation. Not just reduce pollution on something that's not particularly green, but specifically to have a green vacation. And so what's the advice that they give? Carry a reusable shopping bag. Okay, that sounds plausible. I carry a reusable shopping bag when I shop. But let's look at the context here. This person went to Belize. Now, I went to a site where you can look up the emissions from flying around the world. And from flying from New York to Belize and back, lets out about 1.1 tons of carbon dioxide. That's your share, not the entire flight. Each person's share on the flight. And for comparison, it says the maximum amount of CO2 a person should produce per year to halt climate change. Now, I looked up where that came from. That's from the IPCC 2014 report, which actually said people should limit their output to 1 to 2 tons of carbon dioxide. So in the range that they mentioned, this flight to Belize puts you over the lower limit, but they only quote the upper limit. So it's at least 50% what you should put out per year. And of course, you have the entire rest of the year. So most Americans are well over this amount. In this context, carrying a reusable shopping bag, I think there are many people who might think, well, I'm carrying a reusable shopping bag. The flight's not that big of a deal because they don't look up the numbers. So a lot of these tips out there confuse negligible with meaningful and leads to people, I think, polluting more than they might have otherwise. It's not just the Times. Here's the United Nations World Tourist Organization. Their site talks about, you don't have to look at the details here, because they talk about awareness and calling for action, but not actually getting people to act. The environment doesn't respond to your awareness or your feelings. It responds to your actual behavior, what you actually emit. Then there's legislation without popular support. The man pictured here is Sir Tim Smith of what's called the Eden Project. I'll tell you a little bit about the Eden Project and then talk about his experience with some farmers in the US. So the Eden Project was, Tim Smith he's British, he was walking around in the southwest of England, and he came across this big abandoned mine crater where they'd gotten all the coal out, there was no economic value left, and now they left it a big lifeless crater. And he had the idea to turn it into a garden, and here it is today. So he turned this into this, and it's a tourist destination, largely about teaching people about your connection with the land. It's been very successful. I believe it's the most diverse garden in Europe, and now they're starting ones up in China and the United States and elsewhere. So Tim Schmidt is visiting the United States, and he meets some farmers, and he's talking to them about the environment. And he says, I don't remember the exact details, but he says things like, we're losing our topsoil. And they say, yes, that's a big problem. They agree with him on that. And he says, we're draining the aquifers. And they say, yes, that's a big problem. We have to work on that. And he says, there's a lot of monocultures. I forget the details, but things like that. And I say, yes, that's a big problem. Monocultures mean if a disease could wipe out everything. And he says, the climate is changing. They say, F you. He's like, what happened? You were just agreeing with me on all these points, and now this pushback, really hard pushback. And he listens to them about about climate change, what it means to them. Climate change for them means the government coming in and telling them what they can and can't do, generally putting them out of business, totally allowing the big agribusiness companies to come in and do what they want and take over these farms and turn it into factory farming. And not just the government, but Democrats in particular. So what they see climate change meaning is the government coming in, destroying their livelihood, destroying their way of life, destroying family farms, turning it over to big companies, and they vote against that. That's what a democracy is. Democracy means voting by what you want, by what the person wants, by what they want, not by what you want them to believe, but how they see the world. So that's what happens. I see this as an outcome of legislation without popular support, things that they might even agree on if you worked with them, but we don't. So I want to be very clear. I support science, more research. I think it's necessary. I think we should keep doing it. I support education and sharing the facts. I support legislation. I support corporate social responsibility and working on large organizations when they work. But the results that I see so far are these things are creating resistance. These things are creating debate on areas where I think things are very clear. On maintaining ignorance, people don't want to look things up. They don't want to look up how much pollution some things cause when that knowledge will stop them from doing things that they want to do, so they maintain their ignorance. It leads to a lot of people saying other people should change, you should change, but not me. Here's a very easy conversation to have. I've had this conversation many times in creating this presentation. It goes like this. Do you believe that climate change is a problem? Oh, yes, I believe it's a big problem, one of maybe the big problem of our times. Should we do something about it? Oh, yes, we should do something about it. Should we change our behavior? Yes, we have to change our behavior. That's what's causing these things. We have to change our behavior to reduce these effects. Will you change your behavior? Absolutely not. I'm sorry, you just have to understand, I like steak too much. And if that's the price the planet has to pay, it's not going to happen. I'm going to keep eating steak. And you have to understand, I have family all over the world, and my job demands it. And if I don't keep traveling, I'm going to lose my job and I'll lose my apartment. So yes, people have to change, but not me. And people take pride over meaningless change where they carry a bag with them to the store, but then they do things that are much more polluting as a result. Most of all is that people conclude that meaningful change is deprivation and sacrifice. And so they have a mental model where this change is going to make them the chump, going to make them the loser that doesn't turn on the air conditioner, that doesn't eat the steak when everybody else is having a great time. And they figure if civilization is going to go down, I might as well enjoy myself if everybody else is too. I'm not going to be the one to do deprivation and sacrifice. So what does work? What makes me think that I'm going to make a difference? What works in leading people, not using authority, not just trying to convince them, which gets them to dig in their heels. So in my experience, active, experiential, getting people to experience that is not deprivation and sacrifice. And once they have that experience, then they want to keep changing. They can start reaching their potential, and they realize, I can start reaching my potential more. This is what I describe in my book, Leadership Step by Step, and it's also what I teach in my classes. And so a quote from one of my students, I don't know who said this because it came through the anonymous feedback processes of NYU, but they said, this course really changed my definition of leadership. Joshua is an amazing professor. He taught this class in a way that we learned about ourselves and then to understand others. He taught us how to find the real emotion and beliefs behind someone's behavior and use that emotion to lead them and make them feel understood. This is not telling people what to do. This is finding out what they care about and helping them achieve their goals through leadership, through helping them find out how they can act on what they want to do to achieve their goals. That's what I hope that I'm doing with you. That's why I talked about what you want to do and helping you achieve your potential. If you do this, I hope that you will reach your potential and that you will learn these leadership techniques that influence others to reach their potential as well in ways that will reduce our global warming effect and will reduce our pollution and using our natural resources. It connects people's values to their task, and when you do that, it imbues the task, the work, with meaning, and so people feel that what they do is meaningful and purposeful, not just wasted effort. You can expect that if you take on these roles, if you take a leadership role here, that you will be glad that you did. First, by leading yourself to live a better life and pollute less, and then lead others to live better lives by their standards, which will lead them to pollute less, at least the people who agree with, who see this, which, as I understand, is by far and away most people. I'm confident, by the way, that doing this, that not only will you live a better life by your standards and reach your potential and decrease greenhouse gas emissions and pollution and things like that, but I'm confident that everybody who commits to work in this movement and takes on a leadership role, that it'll be hard to keep them in this movement, that they will get hired away, they will get funded for projects of theirs, that they will get elected and things like that, because you will become an effective leader of yourself and others. Like early Teach for America, if you look at the people who did Teach for America early on, a lot of them started other education projects, a lot of them took on leadership roles in government and things like that. Now, that's not to say that the education system in the United States or the world has completely changed, but I think most people would agree that it's improved in many ways, and that the people who went through it, many of them, I think most of them, are very glad that they did it. Not only do I think that you'll get great personal reward from taking on roles here, I say only join if you expect big personal reward. If you expect to improve yourself and to gain from this personally, I see no problem between people acting on their values and benefiting themselves, because we are a social species. I've never met anyone who didn't say, I want the world to be a better place. Everybody I know wants to help other people. And so taking on leadership roles, acting in this, you will improve yourself, your life. The alternative, as I see it, if you value these things and you do not act on your values, seems to me sleepwalking through life, taking on willful ignorance to be able to sleep at night knowing that what you're doing is against your values. It's suppression, it's denial. I don't see that as a healthy way of living. The reason I'm here, first of all, I've looked at a lot of people, a lot of classes of people who are trying to do things, and I see them by and large not effective, often ineffective. They have a partial knowledge of what's going on, and they propose partial solutions. For example, scientists, they have the facts, and I see them trying to spread the facts, and I see them trying to promote legislation, but we saw what happened. The facts people hear and don't act on. Legislation without popular support leads to pushback. And a lot of scientists have this perspective. Here's the facts. If you don't act on them, that's on you, not me. But it's ineffective. It doesn't get people to change their behavior, as we also saw with the obesity and the disease of excess. Business people don't get tragedy of the commons, or they expect the market to take care of things. They say, as we run out of fossil fuels, their price will go up, and renewables, as we devote more resources to them, prices will go down. But virtually no government in the world can stop itself from putting in price supports that keep the prices of oil down, that keep the price of meat down. A hamburger would cost something like $15 if people had to pay for the externalities that are covered in taxes. But that doesn't happen. There's also very rich people. There are fish in Japan that a single fish that people will pay the cost for a single fish that cover the cost of buying an entire boat and putting it out to sea. And when that happens, there are people that the market just doesn't work on, and that means we can keep using up resources that the market doesn't affect. Likewise, a systems perspective. I think that people who have the systems perspective of the environment have the best perspective of a full picture, but they tend to be academic, and I see very few to none of them who are using what they know to lead others. Like the scientists, they say, here's the perspective. If you don't act on it, that's you. But people don't know how to act on it. Technologists often expect technology to solve the situation. And they'll solve a problem, but if you look at the situation from a systems perspective, just solving the technology part, technology tends to exacerbate overshooting, that is to say, having more people than the planet can sustain, leading to collapse overall. For example, technology allows you to fish populations that you couldn't fish before, like deeper or so forth, or it allows you to clean up some carbon dioxide, but if that permits exponential growth of population, then all these effects get overridden and you get collapse. So technology alone, yes, I believe we need technology to capture carbon, to sequester carbon, to make things more efficient, but it doesn't solve the problem alone. They also often also don't get leadership. They don't get what people are capable of. And they often say that human nature just, you can't do certain things that historically people have been able to do, to lead large groups of people, to change their behavior, for example. Economists, it's very rare that you see a technologist that doesn't promote growth as a solution. And the growth, not just growth in the economy, but exponential growth, requiring exponential growth of the population. But exponential growth of the population is the problem. Exponential growth of the population washes out almost any other solution. Politicians in democracies, we call them leaders, but they're followers. They chase votes and funding. So politicians tend to follow in this area. And if you look at the big movements of the past, where large groups of people have made big changes in behavior, it has almost always come from outside democracy, from outside of government. Occasionally you'll have something like Kennedy asking for going to the moon in less than 10 years, but that's very rare. Almost always these things come outside the government. And I thought that my comprehensive background would help. I thought, because I have a background in science, I have a background in leadership and entrepreneurship, and I thought these are very important things. Maybe those things are necessary. Whenever I turn on lights or air conditioning, I always think about, I'm going to be polluting. I'm going to be affecting other people through my behavior, so I try to conserve. But then I realized, as important as these things are, and I think these are very important, and I think for some roles in leadership, these are very important, but experience is much more important. And so in the past couple of years, in the past roughly 1 year, there have been 2 big experiments that I've done that have really changed my perspective on this. One was to avoid packaged food. When I looked at my garbage, as I said, I want to reduce how much I affect other people. You know, I grew up in a polluted world. I don't want to pollute the world for others. And I realized how much of my garbage came from food packaging. And so I gave myself a challenge. For 1 week, I'm not going to buy any food where I have to throw away packaging afterward. And by the way, I should mention, I've done many little experiments before. So for many people, this may sound too big for them to do. I hope this sounds something like you could do, and I hope you give it a shot. But if it sounds like a big challenge, you don't have to start with a challenge like this. But I do recommend you think about some challenges for you to take on that are relevant to you. So I want to talk about what happened. I also joined a farm share where I get vegetables delivered every week. And I got to tell you, I thought at the beginning, remember what I said, it looked like deprivation and sacrifice. I thought there are many foods that I really like that I won't be able to get. And I would go to the store and I'd think, oh, I can't buy this stuff. What can I buy? And I didn't really know until I started doing it. Well, fresh fruits and vegetables were big things that I could do. And it happens that near me, there's a bulk food store where I could bring a bag with me, a reusable bag, and I could fill it up with legumes and nuts and things that were sold by the pound. So my diet changed to fresh fruits and vegetables, legumes and nuts, and it became more delicious than ever before. In this picture, the lettuce and the cucumber I was familiar with, but kohlrabi, I'd never bought that before. I didn't know what it was. Cabbage, I never really bought. And then I started getting all these different things. Eggplants, I never got white eggplants before, and chard, and this stuff looks beautiful to me. And these amazingly ripe tomatoes, fresh picked from the farm, broccoli that was fresh picked from the farm. My diet became more diverse than ever before and more delicious. And by the way, more convenient. Now, I will say I went through a period of what was really deprivation and sacrifice because I didn't know how to cook this stuff. And so I just steam it or fry it in oil and garlic. And you know, it wasn't horrible. I like steamed vegetables, but not only steamed vegetables. But after a while, about 6 months of only eating this, but I didn't just say, I'm just going to eat what I don't like. I would use the occasion to learn how to cook and ask people for advice and things like that. And I started making stuff that was really, really delicious. Oh, here's more of it. Oh, those cherry tomatoes. I can't tell you how good they tasted. And that purple basil, so delicious. I started cooking so much that I really enjoyed this stuff so much that I would invite people over and say, I want to cook for you. By the way, also these farm shares, you get a lot of vegetables, really cheap, because you get the stuff that's in season. I would go to the farmer's market, and when you buy stuff that's in season, it's most delicious and cheapest. And so I asked a few people who came over to write up their opinions of my cooking. And so here, sorry, it's a long quote, but just piece by piece. The result of his work is inspiring. The flavors are as personal and diverse as is the experience of sourcing, preparation, and serving. Josh has mastered a number of vegetable stew dishes with a range of flavors and textures that in a way reflect his worldview. At first taste, each spoonful is a silky light base of root vegetables. Then there's a flash of ginger, spice, and a few hints of fruit like an apple or pear. He then balances out the smooth texture with the occasional crunch of various nuts. What I found most intriguing is how he can transform a vegetable from a rather unappealing snack into a very filling and wholesome meal purely by finding the right balance with just a few other ingredients. I've never taken a class in cooking. I wish you could taste this stuff because I can't tell you how delicious it is. Fruits and vegetables have a lot of flavor if you take the time to really get all these nuances. Another person said, so he pulls the raw vegetable out of the fridge and starts rinsing and chopping them up. A scoop of lentils, some veg, and all until a pressure cooker. We chat about projects and relationships, the past, the future. That's while it's cooking. And then comes the beep when the cooking's done. It's ready. Some crushed nuts go on top, a pinch of salt. I pass on the horseradish, and there it is, steaming in its bowl. The lentils are smooth and solid foundation, a base and a stage on which the dance begin. Radish and chard show their flavors and colors. The nuts add a crunch and contrapuntal finish. It's just so good and so fresh. A conversation among flavors and a reminder of so many other things. A simple and present but full of nuance, complexity, and riches. This is what we evolved to love. Fresh fruits and vegetables cooked lightly, really where the flavors can come out. And by the way, this is more convenient, it's cheaper, and it creates community because people come over and I meet the farmers and so forth. Speaking of the farm, people who I showed this presentation to before asked to see this. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to go through this quickly. If you want to pause this video, by all means pause it. But here I got to visit the farm, Stone Ledge Farm up in upstate New York, not far from the city. They have bees and farm and tractors. They don't actually use that tractor. And this looks like collard greens, more collard greens, and kale, and broccoli growing. I'd never seen broccoli growing. And chard, look at the colors on that stuff. And then rows and rows of here's cabbage growing and peppers and habanero peppers and these cherry tomatoes. I cannot tell you how delicious they were. I'd never seen Brussels sprouts growing fresh like that. I didn't know how eggplant grew on the vine. Rows and rows of the stuff. And when I was there, they had this machine that would upturn the potatoes so I could get potatoes just fresh out of the ground. They had flowers growing and so you could pick the flowers. Here they are up close. I can't tell you how much every summer I look forward to the day when they invite everybody to come and check out the farm. I've never felt closer to the land. It's incredible. And on the right, there's a picture of my kitchen. And on the right, that canvas bag, because I compost everything that is the landfill garbage, which is what's in that canvas bag, is just the dry stuff. So I don't use a plastic bag. When that bag fills, I walk down the hall and empty that down the chute and bring it back from empty. And you're looking at there 6 months of garbage. It took me 6 months before I would walk that down the hall to throw out my landfill garbage. That's how much I reduced my garbage. And I also want to mention that Trader Joe's bag. I really don't go to Trader Joe's because that place, if you don't get packaged food, it's basically a wasteland. There's so much packaged food. I don't shop there. The reason I use that bag is because when I go to the recycling station downstairs in my building, all my neighbors go through that stuff like crazy. There's so much stuff that they don't need. And anyway, there's like an infinite supply of paper bags down there. 2 trips ago, I came across the information of how much greenhouse gas flying produces. And it turns out it's roughly a year's worth of driving. Now, I live in New York City and I don't have a car. And I thought, I was so proud of myself for not having a car. I thought, that's reducing my pollution a lot. And suddenly I felt like, maybe that's really having a bigger effect than I meant. Maybe I have to change that. But what did I do? I put that in the back of my mind and thought, I don't want to think about that because I want to keep traveling. I don't want to be the chump who doesn't travel. The next trip that I had, then I thought to myself, I can't keep ignoring this. I know what's going on and I can't act against my values like this. And so I said, I'm going to go, when I get back, I'm going to go for at least 365 days without flying. March 22nd, 2017 was the 365th day. I've continued it going. So we're in June now. So I think I'm in month 16, maybe just starting month 17. And I got to tell you, it's been an amazing experience. Travel for me was adventure, seeing different cultures, trying different cuisines. And I've been able to get more adventure and finding people from more different cultures without traveling. Now, I live in New York City, so that's easy for me, but I hope that you live in a place where you can explore the values that are important to you. If not, using travel to escape something that's a problem for you, I think it might be hiding and covering up a problem that's a deeper problem for you. In any case, I want to give you some of the numbers that came across afterward. Flying New York to LA coach is 1.5 tons of CO2. And if you compare that to what a citizen of Europe produces in a year, it's significantly less. Americans produce a lot more than that. But let's look at New York LA business class. Business class seats are bigger, and so you can fit fewer people on the plane, so you have to allocate more of the emissions to each person. So business class, you're over the limit. New York, Paris, again, even coach, you're over the limit. New York, Shanghai, over about 2.5 times the limit. New York, Shanghai business class, in one flight, round trip, you're using what a European uses in an entire year. And you're still using all the other stuff that over the course of the rest of your year. Probably if you're flying New York, Shanghai business class, you're probably flying more than just that one flight. And if you fly first class, it's even more. You're way over what a European uses for a year. This is what reinforced my not flying. And I want to reinforce for you, what it may sound like avoid this, avoid that. It may sound like deprivation, but it's not about what I'm not doing. It's what I do instead. And the results for me, by far, when I think of changing my behavior to contribute less to global warming and to pollute less, by far, the most important thing I think of is delicious. My diet is more delicious than ever. And I've eaten a lot of ice cream, a lot of pretzels and junk food and things like that in the past that were designed and engineered to be delicious. And this is way more delicious. It's way more convenient. It's so much more convenient to cook this way and to eat this way. I'm saving way more money than I ever expected. I'm spending a lot less money. When people say they think healthy food is expensive, well, I was about to say, I can't understand how they think that, but I used to think that too. But it's not the food that's expensive. It's not knowing how to prepare it, not knowing how to cook, not knowing what to do with a rutabaga. That's what's expensive. And community, it creates community. I have more people over. I work with more people like the farmers and the other people who do the farm share too. And not traveling means I get to know people in my neighborhood more because I'm not leaving them all the time. Compare my experience of leading myself with the experience of Tim Smith, the people who were having to be forced into doing things. Very different experience. I really am glad that I did it. I wish I'd done it earlier, despite having to go through that transition. So looking back on this experience, I look back and I think it's really sad to see people sleepwalking through life, knowing their values and acting not according to them. When I listen to people talking about flying, people who have no idea how aerodynamics work, people have zero idea of how an internal combustion engine works or how a jet engine works, and who look at other companies and say, look at you, you should account for your externalities. Or who look at politicians and who say, you pulled out of the Paris Agreement, that's bad, that's wrong. And they themselves are way over the limit of the Paris Agreement. They pulled out of the Paris Agreement. We're 6 months into 2017, and most people I talk to have themselves already flown across the country and back, or something like that, and they're over the limit, and they have a problem with others. They're so entitled. They say, oh, so-and-so went to Paris. I want to go to Paris. So-and-so went to Machu Picchu. I want to go to Machu Picchu. You can't tell me I can't go to Machu Picchu. The entitlement. Oh my God. I don't know if people, this is something experiential that if I hadn't experienced the changes and seen how, if you go through 365 days or even like 6 months with the expectation of continuing it longer, you'll see it. And people enforce their ignorance. They don't want to know how much pollution eating meat causes or flying causes or things like that cause. And so they don't want to know, and so they enforce their ignorance. For example, I gave a talk at Columbia University's Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences, and a student who helped organize it, I was talking to him about flying less, and he said, Josh, there's this place in Australia. It's the only place in the world where we can get the data on this one effect about global warming, and I just have to fly to go there because there's nowhere else to go. And now, by this point, it was well into my year, and I'd been looking for lots of alternatives for how to get things done without traveling so much. And I said to him, could you call somebody in Australia to do the measurement for you? Are there people there who can do these experiments and do these measurements? And he paused and he goes, oh, yeah, I guess we could do that. I guess I could call someone. And just like that, someone who he knows more about environment and how to do things about it than anyone. But he just didn't see it because he could do it. Why not? Why not fly when you can? But when you try, you can find these other solutions. There's a show, Secret Eaters. It's British, but there's a lot of episodes that you can watch for free on YouTube. And almost every episode has the same following pattern. It starts by profiling a couple people who are way heavier than they want to be. So in terms of, by the standards of the person on the show, they don't want to be as heavy as they are, and they want to lose a lot of their fat. And so they interview them at the beginning and they say, how many calories do you eat? And by and large, they say they eat an amount that's a healthy amount that's well below the amount that would keep them at the weight that they are. And the people on the show say, how's that possible? And they say, I don't know. There must be something wrong, or maybe it's my genetics or something like that. And so they have them keep a food diary. And in the food diary, they write down everything they eat. And then they calculate the calories that they would eat based on this food diary. And it turns out that the food diary shows that they eat this healthy amount that's below what would be necessary to have them have the weight that they do. And so people on the show, they're like, this is odd. Maybe you really are different than science thinks, or maybe the science is wrong. And then the show starts and they say, okay, we're going to put a bunch of cameras throughout your house so we'll be able to see how much you eat. And what they don't tell them is that they also hire private detectives who follow them around for this week and watch their behavior outside the houses. And what happens, as soon as they leave the house, like they go to get gas to fill up their car, and the private detectives show them walking out of the gas, paying for the gas, and they're eating a big candy bar that never showed it up into their food diary. And they see them eating tons of stuff outside the home. And then when they're in the home, they see them largely late at night. 5 or 10 times at night, they'll go into the kitchen and they'll eat stuff that never showed up in the food diary. And that stuff tends to be caloric, very high calorie dense, not particularly nutritious stuff. And so I think that happens. What happens with them with their eating, I think, is the same sort of thing happens with us with our pollution. We don't even notice that we're doing it. Stuff that we do. By the way, in Secret Eaters, at the end, they show them the videos of them eating these candy bars, going back to the fridge multiple times in the night, and the stuff that didn't show up in their food diaries. And as best I can tell, these people are like, that was me? Did I do that? And they seem to really not know that they did it. Either they're lying to themselves extremely effectively, or they really don't know. And this denial and suppression is extremely effective. I think we do that with respect to the environment a lot too. When I was a child growing up, there was a family that we kind of knew, and in that family, there was a big story in the newspaper, like full-page story, where the son was so using drugs that was selling off the family expensive stuff to keep the habit going. And the mother just, the mother was saying, I have a great son, we have a great family. Even as the family heirloom silver was disappearing from the household, the mother was still saying, my son is great, there's no problem. I think we're doing that. We want to sleep at night, and being able to deny and suppress things that are going on around us, we're very effective at doing that. Lastly, a big effect of what got me to say there's stuff going on, and I want to step up and do things if no one else is doing it. It was the U.S. election. We have someone who says that global climate change is a hoax. Everybody knows this is not news. I don't have to tell you about it. And it hit me that if a solution requires a Mandela, a King, a Václav Havel, a Gandhi of the environment, they worked on political things, but here it's on environmental things. And if no one else is doing it, it started leading me to think, I can't wait another 4 years for another president. If not me, then who? If not now, when? And the only answer I could come up with was, I don't see anyone else doing it, and so maybe it has to be me to step up. Historically, these changes don't come from within government anyway. Most of these people who made large social changes came from outside government. Did I want to become a lightning rod? I think whoever takes a leadership role here is going to get a lot of resistance. People are not going to want to, at first, they're not going to want to follow this person. And I asked myself, am I up for this? And I thought, if not me, then who? I don't see other people doing it. I don't want to become a lightning rod, but I'd rather act than not, than watch these things happen and just to have people follow the leaders who are moving in a different direction. And besides, these people who, looking back, they seem like great, great historical figures. But what were they when things happened? Gandhi was a lawyer, just a regular guy who was kicked off a train. He didn't want to become the Gandhi that we know. He was just a regular guy. He became Gandhi, the Gandhi that we think of, through his behavior. Martin Luther King, when he started working on the Montgomery bus boycott, he was fresh out of school. And by the way, here are his degrees. If you look at the date here, it's 1951, shortly before the Montgomery bus boycott. And if you look carefully, in public speaking, he got a C and a C+. Martin Luther King, the person we think of as one of the greats of all history, the great orators of all time, got C's in school. A lot of what made him great came from the practice of what is required from us today. If the same thing that is required of us, that's what made him great. Václav Havel was a playwright. What does he know to do to become one of the great historical figures of helping lead Czechoslovakia to freedom from these autocratic rulers? Wendy Kopp, who started Teach for America, that was an undergraduate project that she started and became a major, major force in the United States. And now she's leading it outside the US to around the world. I am saying that the earth is materially limited, that we're using up resources that are not being refreshed. There's a finite planet. It seems obvious to me. I'm not saying that other things are limited, in particular, happiness, friendship, joy, satisfaction, adventure, emotional reward. that is not limited. It's, in fact, if it's limited, it's only limited by yourself. And I would say to you that if you think that you have to travel the world to get adventure or to get to see different cultures, I think that you have beliefs that are holding you back from creating the skills in yourself to create happiness, to create joy, to create friendship, to create all these things that are the value that travel and steak and so forth provide. You can create these things through emotional and social skills. And so when I say to take on these challenges and go through what looks like sacrifice and deprivation, on the other side, what you get when you go through this transition is the skills, the emotional and social skills to create these things without external things that produce pollution and global warming. So I suggest to you, and I use the word faith deliberately as a scientist. What I mean by faith is belief without evidence. I'm not saying belief in the supernatural. I'm saying belief in yourself, that you can create in yourself these social and emotional skills to create all the adventure and discovery and joy and happiness these other things were bringing you without these other things. And by the way, not traveling was something that I took on that challenge myself. There's plenty of other things. You don't have to do the challenges that I did, although I think you'll eventually find yourself going in those directions. But most people, when I talk to them, they have ideas of things that they've always wanted to do. A lot of people come to me after this talk and they say, I always wanted to do this thing, always turn off the lights when I wasn't in a room or compost. But I always felt like, what's the point? And you show me that there's purpose to it. And they start doing these things. And so probably you have something in your mind that you've wanted to start. But the goal here is to create more joy. It's not about deprivation. It's about what you do instead of these things that comes from living by your values. And I guarantee that if you live by your values, yes, you may go through a transition period that seems hard, but on the other side, you'll be glad that you did. And eventually it stops being faith. You do one of these experiments and you find out, oh, this works. You do another one, you start feeling like, oh, I see how this works. And you don't have to have faith in yourself. You have the full expectation from experience that you will be able to create the emotional reward that you wanted to. Here's a way of looking at things that I look at. Some things you can do for yourself and some things you can do for others. And there's a whole spectrum. You can do both, but there are things you do for yourself and things you do for others. And things you can do things passively or actively. And so let's look at each quadrant here. There's really a range of things, but if you look at things that are passive and for yourself, they tend to be things like eating cookies and ice cream, things that it benefits you. You don't really have to work hard at it. It's, you're going to like it. I mainly changed to fruit, but I like these things. So I definitely do passive things for myself. So active for yourself. Those things tend to be things like exercise, personal growth, things you have to take on challenges to do, but they only benefit yourself. I'm a big supporter of these things. Passive things for others, they tend to be things like awareness without acting. So people who are aware of what they do, but don't actually do something about it, I guess I'd rather have that than not being aware at all. But the upper right quadrant, things that are active for others, those are things like leading others, taking responsibility, being accountable, having empathy and compassion. That's what comes when you take on these things. These are the things a lot of people don't do because they expect they don't see that there's going to be rewarding. But as I've shown, when you do these things according to your values, not only do you get these rewards, the emotional rewards that I talked about, you get all the other ones too. I have more delicious in my life now than I ever did before. So I get the joys of cookies and ice cream and so forth. When you get through this transition, you get everything by going up into this corner. It's hard to get there and most people don't do it. But if you do, you get all the benefits of everything else. And that's why I recommend doing these things. I'm going to talk in a little bit about why to take on these challenges and how to do these challenges. But I would not ask people to do them without successful examples. So there's big precedent. So here are a few examples. Wendy Kopp, who started Teach for America. Václav Havel, who became the president of Czechoslovakia, who helped lead through the challenge of getting rid of these autocratic rulers. Martin Luther King, I don't have to describe. I don't think. Nelson Mandela, same thing. Gandhi. What I'm talking about here is being the change that you want to see in the world. Of Thoreau, who inspired me by living his values at Walden and in civil disobedience. And long before anyone knew anything about a greenhouse effect, said, what's the use of a fine house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on? And Ralph Nader, if you think of him only as a president, as someone who ran for president recently, I'll talk in a minute about what he did in the 60s and 70s for people who don't know. And these are people who influenced me, but you can think of your heroes. All right, here's a successful case, the Montgomery bus boycott. Looking back, a lot of people think, well, okay, boycotts work. All they had to do was not take the bus for a little while. Well, it was a whole year. And I want you to consider walking for a year in Montgomery, Alabama. And, it's harder to walk than it is to take the bus. It's just easier to take a bus. I don't want to equate civil rights with the environment. These are very, very different things. But what I do want to point out that's similar is the choice between acting on your values and doing what's comfortable. Because I think mentally, internally, it's a similar decision that people went through. And I want to reinforce the difficulty here. I looked this up. June through September, the average high temperature in Montgomery is 87 to 92 degrees. So for 4 months out of the year, you got to deal with these temperatures that are 90 degrees and plus. This is not an easy choice to make. And you might think, oh, Martin Luther King organized it. Well, Martin Luther King at the time was fresh out of school and he was a grunt worker. He was not a Nobel laureate. He was a guy fresh out of school. He was not a great orator. And, there was no internet. So to organize this stuff, it meant a lot of phone trees and things like that. How do you organize people not to defect and take the bus? It was a lot of work. And he had people pushing against him, threats against him and his family. This was 90 plus years since the Emancipation Proclamation. That's 90 plus years of Jim Crow and not progress. So I think a lot of people had a lot of reasonable expectation that this would not succeed. I think it probably felt hopeless for many. And we know the result. This was a quote that Martin Luther King quoted a woman named Mother Pollard, a 72-year-old woman who, 72 years old, walking for a year. Even if this worked, her life, it wasn't going to be that much longer. She wasn't going to see widespread changes over the United States like we saw. But she said, my feet is tired, but my soul is at rest. And I think feet's being tired is a small price to pay for living by your values and for your soul being at rest. And that's what they got. That's what I think we can get as well. After that change, could you imagine going back? What does it do to your conscience to go to the back of a bus, to be forced to go to the back of the bus after you've walked to get your freedom? Or in this case, what does it mean to pollute like you used to once you learn that you don't have to? I can tell you from my experience, I can't go back to the pollution that I did, to taking more than 6 months to fill up my bag with landfill garbage. Think of Washington, D.C. Here's the date, August 28th, 1963. Back then, in the 60s, you didn't have air conditioning everywhere. If you wanted to not be out in the heat, you might go to see a movie. If someone said, here's a great option. If you go outside, here's this thing that you could do. And if you say, I don't feel like doing that, I'm going to go see a movie, you might have missed Martin Luther King giving the I Have a Dream speech. And I bet of the 250,000 people who were on the mall that day, I bet none of them, or a very small number of them, regret going out in the heat that day. If you take on these challenges, yes, they're hard work. Yes, they may make you uncomfortable, but that's how you get the results. That's why most people don't live by their values. They don't reach their potential. And that's why I'm giving you the opportunity here to reach your potential. It probably felt hopeless for many. What's the point in going? But we know that things like this led to the Civil Rights Acts that followed. And look, we are far from racial equality in the United States. But 45 years later, less than half a century from the I Have a Dream speech, Obama was elected. And I bet if you asked the people on the mall that day, I bet a small fraction of them, maybe none, would predict that within 50 years that a black man would be elected to the White House. Here's Jesse Jackson, who was a leader in that movement, and he had lots of reasons to cry at Obama being elected, but I think one of them was he probably didn't expect it to happen so soon within his lifetime. This is not a political thing. I'm not talking about Obama's political values. I'm talking about just his skin color here and the change that happened in what appeared a very short period of time. Martin Luther King talked about how it was hundreds of years of segregation and so forth and slavery in the United States. Other big changes. Ralph Nader, here's legislation that he helped lead. Look at these acts that he was the main person leading to, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act. Oh, but this isn't it. Here's double that amount. And that's even not, there's even more. Things like the Freedom of Information Act. Any politician would be proud to have this many things happen. He also got a lot of organizations started. So he was the impetus behind, I can't go through all of them here. Here's just the A's, the B's, the C's, more C's, the D's, the E's, the F's. Anyone would be proud of these things. And it goes on to the G's and so on. But I'm just putting these ones up. Other successful examples. I'm not going to go into the details, but in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, a lot of fisheries realized we're fishing the last fish. If we don't stop ourselves, we're going to be out of a livelihood. So they got together and figured out ways to self-regulate. Now that's on a small scale where people knew each other. Can we extrapolate to a global scale? I'm not sure, but I want to try. The ozone hole, the globe got together and said, this is a problem, let's solve it. And it used to be growing, now it's shrinking. Indian independence from England. This is a big case. This is Gandhi. Major case, major social change. This is a guidance counselor talking to a high school student. And I was talking to someone about this, and he talked about how when he was a kid, he talked to a friend who, his friend sat with a guidance counselor talking about their future, both of them smoking. That was less than a generation ago. The change in perspective on smoking is huge. A guidance counselor who smoked today in school, let alone with a student, would be fired immediately. Our views on smoking are completely changed. Will our views change on eating meat in factory, if supporting factory farms, will it change like that? I'm not sure, but maybe. I see it happening with sugar today. Sugar looks like people are going to look down on it in the way that they look down on smoking. I'm not sure, it might change. And then my experiments were very successful. My life is so much better by my standards today. And if you act by your values, they could be similar to mine, but they may be different. But if you act on your values, you will also get that great improvement in your life. Another big example, people talk about global warming, something that's happening somewhere else. That's a problem for future generations. Well, when I was growing up, there were these big famines in Africa, and they got together and they said, we're going to do something about it. And I'm talking about USA for Africa in this case. These musicians, they didn't have to do this. And the words that they said are as meaningful today about global warming, because people say that's someone else's problem, that's a different generation. It's no longer elsewhere. It's no longer future generations. What they said is today the case. We are the world. We are the children. Not the world away, not future generations. We are the world, we are the children, and we are the ones to make a brighter day. They said, so let's start giving. I would say, let's start changing our behavior. The transition, this is the big challenge. This is what people don't generally do, and what I as a leader, I hope to lead you through, and I hope to get you to transition through and realize it improves your life so much that you also take on these techniques and lead others. The transition is a struggle. It will look hard. It will look, and it probably does look like sacrifice and deprivation. You don't want to be the chump who changes when no one else does, who loses out when everyone else has pleasure and joy, but you'll get more pleasure than them. And frankly, from your perspective now, it's easier not to try. And if so, it's probably not worth it. And most people listening, it's probably not worth it. I'm looking for leaders, not followers. I'm looking for people who take on these challenges. I don't want people following me because there's billions of people that have to change for these effects to make a difference. And that means at this stage, this movement needs people to take on leadership roles who don't just change themselves, but also lead others. Our culture hides externalities. People don't know how much pollution they're causing and how much the pollution has an effect. Society says, you've done enough. You've done your part. You don't have to do any more. Now go out and buy stuff. By the way, that Henderson Island, that island that I showed in the middle of the Pacific, that's all stuff that people just don't need. Anyway, you will feel entitled. You will feel like, I deserve to do these things. Other people got to do them. I want to do them. You can't stop me. Yes, you're going to feel that way. You're going to feel like you have no alternative. You're going to feel like, if I don't do this, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my apartment. You're going to feel that way. But people have changed for less, and achieve more. You're going to feel like your actions don't matter. You're going to feel like, if I change and no one else does, what's the difference? If you overcome these inhibitions here, you will learn tremendous leadership skills that virtually every great leader had to be able to overcome these challenges to become the leaders that they became, to become the great historical figure that they did. This is your chance to overcome these things by developing these skills. And once you do them here, you'll be able to apply these things all over in lots of other places. You won't have to face prison like Mandela and King and Gandhi did. You will have to take on more than just one hot day on the DC Mall. I don't say start with these hard transitions. But you got to take on some things. But the thing is that you won't be taking on hard transitions. You'll be acting according to your values. You can choose for yourself what potential you want to live up to. If that potential is to become a Mandela, you may take on challenges at the level that he did. I don't think you'll be in jail for 27 years or even at all, because this is not a go to jail issue. But you can take on whatever level of challenge you want, including influencing billions of people, and you will reach the potential that you want. Or if you want to do minor things, you can do lesser things and be a background player. That's fine too. But you can take on a role here. The biggest challenges that you face will be these internal feelings of entitlement and hopelessness, not the big challenges of like lifting heavy weights or physical challenges. It's going to be these feelings internally. But getting over these things will be the greatest things you do to improve your life, I guarantee. And I can tell you that afterward, you'll see like I do, not flying is easy. The things that you think are hard, they're easy. Not getting into a plane is really easy. I'm not getting into a plane right now. You're probably not getting into a plane right now. Anyone can not get into a plane. People have been not getting into planes for hundreds of thousands of years that there have been Homo sapiens around. Billions of people still have no way of getting into an airplane today. You can do it. The challenge is to have faith in yourself, to find out how to live your life without doing these things. And you can. And look, I'm probably going to fly again in my lifetime, But as the time passes, as I'm going over a year, I'm finding more and more ways to achieve my goals without flying planes. And I want to point out, I knew when that year was starting that my book was coming out in that year. I wasn't going to be able to do a book tour by flight. That's a major hindrance. A lot of people hear me talk about this, and they have this attitude of, well, it's easy for you, but for me, it's much harder. It was no easier for me than anybody else. It's not easier for anybody else than it is for you. The question is, do you have the skills to create a fuller life without it? You can develop those skills, and only by creating this challenge for yourself will you develop those skills, and your life will be far better for it. And will you be able to do what billions of people who can't fly, they have to deal with the pollution that you're causing. They're not flying, and they find ways to be happy. So can you find ways to be happy as billions of other people are doing now, as hundreds of thousands of years worth of people have done? Now, many of you are sitting there thinking, I don't have to change. You've told yourself stories as to why what you're doing is the right thing to do. You, Josh, you have no place to come in and tell me what to do. All right, fine. If you don't want to change, that's your business. Go off and do your thing. You don't have to. But for people who do want to take it on, I'm here to say you can do it and you can take it on. And that's what I think is the role that I'm trying to do here. And many of you will challenge me. They'll say, Josh, you should change. You haven't changed. You've changed maybe some, but you can change more. Other people, they should change. They can change a lot more. Okay, maybe I should. Maybe they should. If that's what it takes, if that's what gets you to stop, that's your business. You don't have to do it. Go and do your other thing. But for people who want to change, you can take on these challenges and become the person you want to be. You can reach your potential as much as you want. Only you know your potential. And if you start deflecting on others, you're never going to reach that potential. Only you can take on responsibility for your actions. Other people may be doing other things, but they can't take responsibility for your actions and how your actions affect other people. When I was a child, responsibility and accountability, I didn't like those, but a big part of maturation went from saying, not my problem, or I didn't do it, to saying how I affect others makes a difference to me. And in a way that I never could have expected, my life improved by taking on responsibility and accountability. It meant I couldn't do things that I used to do, and it meant I would have to start doing things that I couldn't do. It improved my life. Why? Mainly because it led to empathy and compassion. If I'm responsible to whom? Accountable to whom? It meant seeing the world through other people's perspective, what's valuable to them. Because I don't want to do the things that I think are valuable to them but aren't. And I don't know what leaders you thought of, but the leaders I thought of, these are the fundamental skills. The really fundamental skills are empathy and compassion for others. And I'm not saying that I'm the Dalai Lama here, but I'm far advanced of where I used to be in terms of these skills. And by the way, speaking of hot summer days, as I did before, I looked up what movies you would have watched had you not gone to the I Have a Dream speech. Had you thought, oh, that's too much. If you had gone to see a movie, the number one movie that week was Flipper. Flipper, you could have seen Flipper instead of I Have a Dream. That's what you might have, if you said, I just want to be comfortable. Living by your values, I just want to be comfortable. The other one is Gidget Goes to Rome, a couple weeks was the number one movie. That's what you would have gotten instead of the I Have a Dream speech. And I tell you, if you go through these challenges, you'll look back at what people do instead and the excuses they give as Flipper and Gidget level stuff when you could have been Martin Luther King level stuff. People say, but so much will have to change. I can't believe the amount of stuff we'd have to do. Yes, the systems contributing to the problems that we agreed on will have to change because otherwise nature will change things for us, and that'll be through disease and pestilence and famine and wars over resources and things like that. And millions of people displaced from their home, billions, maybe hundreds of millions of people displaced from their homes. That's why I'm looking for leaders, because each thing that we do will lead to other challenges that we have to keep taking on. The alternative is nature doing it for us, which will not be so pretty. Leading yourself and others mean entrepreneurial opportunities, job offers, promotions, fame for those who want it, not fame for those who don't want it. It will also mean working long hours for low pay. You'll be so happy that you did these things. You'll be glad that you did them. And it's going to lead you to getting job offers and things like that. You're going to get plenty of other opportunities if you take on these roles now, if you take on the leadership role here, and you could be a leader of a major movement involving billions of people. Another thing, people say they want exotic. They want to travel because they want exotic foods, for example. But today, mangoes are easier to come by than turnips. I don't know anyone who'd say, I'd rather have a mango, if given the choice between a mango and a turnip, who'd pick a turnip. But in my experience, in living in New York and not getting packaged food and not traveling, my options over the winter were turnips and rutabagas and beets and carrots and potatoes and kohlrabi and things like that. I'd never heard of some of those things. And now I ended up having more delicious food. I don't miss mangoes. In today's world, a turnip is more exotic than a mango. And so people who say they're going for exotic, they're not, because they're not eating those turnips. That's why they're not for sale in so many places. Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia, I really like the taste of it. And if I eat a lot of Ben & Jerry's, the apple doesn't taste very sweet. But if I don't eat the Ben & Jerry's, I have more sweet in my life, even though I have less sugar. So my life today has more exotic, more sweet, and actually, for that matter, more volume of food, because what I eat is so calorically undense that I eat tons of it. And I feel so full because it's so full of fiber and so healthy. So my life has more of these things that most people expect that they travel and eat packaged food for. We say we want adventure and culture, but we put our grandparents who lived in very different worlds. They grew up through the Depression, through Prohibition, through World War II, through very different cultures than we live in today, but we put them in homes and we don't really get to meet them. So for example, here, this woman here is Frances Hesselbein. If you don't know her, she's the mentor of my mentor, Marshall Goldsmith. She was the CEO of the Girl Scouts, one of the main people leading the Girl Scouts to be an elite thing to something that represents a cross-section of American culture. She was called by the great leadership thinker and writer Peter Drucker, she was called he called her the greatest leader in America. She won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I spoke to her about World War II. What was it like in that time? Because people today, they talk about deprivation and sacrifice being something they don't want to do. She said, every man in my life served. Every man she knew served. I guess women couldn't. And so I said, okay, that's what they did, but what did it feel like, deprivation and sacrifice? And she said, it's just what we did. No second thoughts. It's just what we did. People today look at Machu Picchu as too much of a challenge. That's not risking your life to fight in the Pacific, in Europe. And she also told me about how she had family, ancestors of hers, when the Civil War broke out, there's a family of, I think, 6 or 7 sons. They all served. And she has letters from them and their wives talking about the challenges that they went through, but they all served. This is not, the climate change and pollution is not a risk your life thing. I'm not talking about risking your life. That's just what people did in other times. We're talking about maybe you miss Machu Picchu, but again, it's not about what you're missing. You can't see everything in the world. And if you can't see everything, you might as well learn of how to enjoy what you do have. So it's really you developing the skills to create happiness, joy, emotional reward, adventure, and so forth on your own. And you can do it because people have been doing it for generations, for hundreds of thousands of years. People are doing it today. You can do it. I learned that I could do it. So what can you do? I ask people, who wants to do something? Here's what you can do. Part one. One, take on a personal challenge like the ones that I did. You could copy me and do what I did about avoiding food packaging for a week. Something that produces a significant effect. I'm not saying you have to change the entire world, but something measurable with the intent to grow. I didn't do it for a week thinking I'm going to do it for a week and go back, with the intent to keep it going. Maybe it's not flying, but it doesn't have to be. Something, you probably have something in mind that you've wanted to do. Like people tell me, Josh, I always wanted to do this. Now you've given me the motivation to do it. If you don't have ideas so far, some people come to me and say, what should I do? I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to be more noise. There's plenty of stuff out there. And I want you to take at least the step, if you haven't thought of something already, to do the research to find something. There's plenty of tips out there. Research and figure it out for yourself so you can own it. So it's your project that you own. You're not doing it for me. You're doing it for yourself. I'll give you some example of the challenges that I've taken on and other people have taken on. So a big one is avoiding meat, a very big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Avoiding packaged food worked for me. It was very effective. Picking up litter. One student of mine, he's picking up 10 pieces of litter per day and throwing it away. He's emailing me. By the way, that came from me because I'm picking up a piece of litter per day. And he emails me. He's been doing it for the month of June. And he emails me about how do people behave the way they do? What do people care about? And then he learns about himself. Avoiding flying, that's one that I'm doing. Some people may say avoiding driving, avoiding taxis and taking public transportation and walking a lot more. Avoiding air conditioning. Dressing up warm. If you're in a place where it's hot, where it's cold right now, maybe you dress warmly and don't use the thermostat so much. And here's one that people aren't doing, but I have to put this in here because having a child has such a major effect on global warming. Family planning. A lower population means more resources for everybody. And because people die anyway, you just have to have fewer kids for the population to decrease in time. This is a question to put out to the audience. I'm just going to go quickly. Does anyone have any ideas? What would the challenge be? What's the effect that it would lead to? And how long would it take? And for more ideas, you might hear some places you might look, some documentaries I found very useful. The Story of Stuff is free on the internet to find. Cowspiracy, Inconvenient Truth, The True Cost. Look them all up. There's plenty of others, documentaries that might give you ideas. What you can do, part 2. Join this movement. The first one is about leading yourself. The next one is about leading others. And it is not about saying, you changed, I'm not going to. It's about a message. I changed. It was awesome. It led me to improve my life. I wish I'd done this earlier. And now behaving and communicating in ways to get others to also to realize that they can live by their values and take them on. That's why I'm looking for leaders. And I've realized, because I don't want people saying you change but not me, because they can't credibly say that what this change will mean. So I will only accept help. If you want to change and say you want others to change but not yourself, that's not part of this movement. I only want people doing things in this movement who have done part one. And so I ask you, can you help with? Are you someone, here are the things that I think I could really use help with right away. Can you help with the following? And if you can, please contact me. Web design. I want to make it so that people right now could go on their phones and go onto a site and say, this is my name, this is what I'm going to do, this is how long I'm going to do it for. To help create the legal organization. Maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it's a for-profit. To do event planning so I can talk and deliver this, and other people can deliver this message to more and more people. To create a podcast. To put this on social media and publicity. But the big thing is to lead in communities that you can reach better. Because I can only reach so many people. And there are many communities that you'll reach much more effectively than I can. And I want you to take this, make it yours, and make it effective with that community. And what you'll get out of this if you take on this role, world-class leadership, entrepreneurial training and experience. I talked about the effects of the benefits that my students got. You will get that too, plus all of this experience, to whatever level that you want. If you've ever read a leadership book or an entrepreneurship book, put in your mindset what it would take for you to take on these leadership challenges and to lead others. And now read that book, and that book will come alive, and you will feel empowered and inspired like you never would have just reading that book without thinking about joining this movement. You'll live by your values and stop sleepwalking through life. And sometime in the future, when you're sitting there with a grandchild on your knee, and that grandchild looks up to you and says, Grandma or Grandpa, what did you do when we realized that if we didn't change and change fast, these huge problems would happen? What did you do? You won't have to say, I was watching Gidget and I was watching Flipper. You can say, I took a leadership role, and part of the reason that you are here today is what I did and led many other people to change your behavior, and we changed it quickly, and people are living better lives, and I was a major piece of that. It means that you'll develop integrity. That's what living by your values when other people can't tell. You'll have confidence to lead others. You'll be at the forefront of a movement. Your relationship with nature will change. Your food will be more delicious. You'll love the hard work. And you will be a peer with these heroes that are right now your role models. And I got to tell you, there's some things that you do now that you love that you're going to lose. You're not going to be able to do things, and you're going to like your life more for it. The vision, it's still forming, but some of the things that I expect to have happen when people join this movement, many people the world over will experiment and discover living by their values. People will share and lead others. I hope to see viral growth, kind of like the Ice Bucket Challenge, except people doing what they want to do, not what others tell them. And then I see an infrastructure forming of this movement, and more talks, more media. And this is what I hope that you will help have happen. And then we in this movement will support and lead the legislation that right now they're swimming upstream to try to get laws passed, and we'll help it form. And we'll institutional change of companies forming to pollute less and so forth, that they'll have an easy time doing it because of the change that we lead them to. A global, widespread, active approach to the environment, not just measuring data, which is what I see a lot of now, or taking for granted that we have to keep doing what we used to do, that we'll say we can act, we can change. That there'll be more resources per capita, as I expect that the population will decrease because we plan it that way, not because nature forces us on it. And so I ask you, what do you want to achieve? Because you can help achieve it, and this movement is going to form around it. I expect to see large changes in beliefs and values, so that people, like smoking, people see smoking as bad now. It used to be sexy. It used to be something people looked up to. Will it happen that people will make an association of this? This is, to me, a necessary part of flying. If you think you can fly without things like this happening, I humbly disagree. Or same thing, driving. This is what happens when you have oil wells. And maybe disposable products and packaging. All the packaged food that you eat, some of it may be something that you threw away that you didn't ever need, is on this island in the Pacific. That no family planning, that population growing unchecked, that when we compete with resources, it means extinctions of other animals. And I got to say, frankly, I don't like our odds. When I look at this, when I think of the amount of change that has to happen and the amount of inertia and people not changing. But that leads me to Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you've read it. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's widely regarded as one of the great books of the 20th century, of all time, really. And in it, Viktor Frankl talks about his experiences. He was captured by the Nazis and put in death camps, including Auschwitz. He lived through the experience, and he talked about when he was in a situation that was one of the worst situations humans have created for each other, people still found meaning. They were given not enough food to live on. So every day they'd get a piece of bread, and they would have to keep that piece of bread and keep every last piece of it because they needed every calorie. And even then, when they had not enough to live on, some people would see people would eat with even less, and they would take a little piece of their bread and they would give it to someone else. And that kept them going more than the calories did. So on the border between life and death, having something to live for, having purpose, having meaning, can make the difference between life and death. But he could also tell when someone had lost that sense of meaning, when someone gave up. And so quoting Viktor Frankl, he would say the only exceptions to meaning keeping people alive were those who had lost the will to live and wanted to, quote, enjoy their last days. Thus, when we saw Comrade smoking his own cigarettes, we knew he had given up faith in his strength to carry on, as opposed to saving the cigarette and trading it with the guard for food. And once lost, the will to live seldom returned, meaning they died. And so looking at it from Viktor Frankl's, using Viktor Frankl's terminology, I'm not ready to, quote, enjoy my last days by putting material pleasure over meaning. And even if some disaster is inevitable, people probably know that if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases today, sea levels would keep rising. I still find more meaning in living by my values. Yes, we can't change everything, but there's different levels of disaster. There's losing 90% of the population, losing 50% of the population, or losing some smaller percent, or maybe losing none. Just people having to move. That's still billions of people, and I want to be a part of that change. And besides, as I've mentioned, I have created more pleasure too. We're not on the border between life and death. It's doing things that you know that you can do. And I want to close with this message that you can help, that you're not alone, that your actions have purpose and meaning, that you don't have to wait for others to act first, that you can lead yourself and others, to have faith in yourself, that if you take on these challenges, that you'll develop the expectation from having the skills to create meaning and purpose and joy and adventure and exotic and all these other things that you are getting from the outside world. And then let's do what no one has done before to improve billions of people's lives, including especially your own, leading yourself and others to reach your potential and enjoy life more, and in the process, as a side effect, to clean the earth. So thank you. Now let's get started. And before I finish, I'd like to ask, will you commit? And if you are willing to, please contact me. Please go to my website and contact me at joshuaspodek.com and tell me, will you commit to a personal challenge, to taking on a challenge yourself, and then once you have, to take on a leadership role in this movement? I would love to have you aboard.